headquarters of common sense.
Talk Radio.
Can you tell me, firstly, Femi, are they right? Are they right to be holding Ottawa and Canada to ransom over these anti-vaccine mandates and restrictions?
So you have to separate three things out. First of all, is it morally okay to not take the vaccine? On that principle, given that we know that vaccines cut the risk of transmission because it means you fight the disease faster and therefore are less likely to pass it on, that means that you can slow the transmission rates, which lower. And given that Canada is going through troubles in terms of hospital capacity and waiting lists, etc., it is a moral obligation, especially in light of the fact that there are countries around the world that don't have these vaccines and are waiting for them, and we're essentially hoarding them and not using them. So it's a moral obligation to actually take the vaccine. Second of all, is it practical and cost effective to use mandates to make this work? Now, with that, you've got to weigh up the risk of what they're suggesting potentially, because around about 90% of truckers in Canada are vaccinated. So you potentially risk about 16,000 truckers on the road versus the potential risk to the healthcare system and therefore the economy of allowing unvaccinated drivers to potentially spread the disease. Third thing is it right for them to protest? And on that principle, do they have the right to protest if they oppose something? Absolutely. And I think that's one of the issues that we're seeing in the UK.
Portia, I mean, there's a lot to unpack there, but it's morally right to take the vaccine, and because of the cost to the health service, they should do.
Well, we've seen that vaccines don't necessarily work. You can still pass on the virus and catch the virus if you are vaccinated. And if it's about the impact on the health service, it's not as though truckers are the most public-facing jobs. They sit in their trucks most of the days, back across the border, go to the bedrooms. They're not really, if they do catch COVID, they're not spreading it here, there, and everywhere. So this mandate is not going to achieve its goal. It's unjust, given that they could still catch COVID anyway. And
But Portia, is it right that you use the words "the vaccine doesn't work"? I understand that most people have the view that vaccines will eradicate something being transmitted, when in actual fact, what's happening with this vaccine is that, yes, you can still pass it on, but it will reduce the severity of the illness that you may get. So is it fair for you to characterise it as not working in that way?
Having a vaccine mandate doesn't work.
No, but you did say the vaccine doesn't work, and I just wanted to clarify that.
Well, it doesn't stop you from getting COVID. Yes, it reduces perhaps the severity of it in some cases, but I don't think you can use that to enforce
and the likelihood of passing it on. That's the crucial thing. Because you fight the disease faster. Because you fight the disease faster, you have the disease and you're transmissible for less time, which means you're less likely to pass it on. And given that we're dealing with in the UK 150 to 160,000 deaths, even if you reduce it by 10%, and we are talking about 63% reduction, even if it was just 10%, you're talking about saving thousands of lives.
Let's bring this though to what you would want, or what one would want the outcome of this sort of action to be. Now, if one who is in the government wants people to take the vaccine, I am very much in favour of that being happening through debate, through conversation, through information, rather than through coercion, mandates, freedoms being restricted, being told you can't do your job to cross the border as a lorry driver to do so, because ultimately that is not going to convince people to take the vaccine, and it's also an infringement on people's civil liberties. A lot of people who are on these marches or on these convoys have actually had the vaccine but object to the kind of restrictions around them. So it's not fair that we characterise this about sort of pro or anti-vaccine in general, right?
So with this, we're talking about the fact that if they're unvaccinated, they'll have to quarantine for 14 days. So what you were saying, Portia, about how we're not talking about truckers spreading the disease. We're talking about after they get back, having to quarantine to prevent them from going around and spreading the disease. That's what we're talking about here. And it's
highly unlikely, though, that having got into the truck, delivered the goods, got back across the border again, they're not going to have had much time to pick up the disease anyway, vaccinated or otherwise. It's not proportionate. A trucker is one of the least publicly engaging roles with other people. They're fairly solitary time in the truck. And it also just shows the hypocrisy of introducing any form of vaccine mandates because it's so disproportionate to the situation. Yes, it might reduce like the chance of hospitalization minimally, but at the end of the day, you have a choice and a right to decide what you do and do not put into your body. And that shouldn't be overridden for the sake of maybe saving a few more people from hospital.
Femi?
So yes, everybody has a choice as to what they take into their body. But for example, if you work, we all have the obligation. Well, sorry, doctors and nurses have an obligation to take certain vaccines in general, other than COVID, and so that's an obligation that you have. And if you have, and we all have rights which we have to abide by, and the rules we have to abide by in order to participate in society. You all have to have brakes in your cars, seatbelts in your cars. There are things we have to do to participate in society. This is one of them, especially given, as I said, there are countries around the world that don't have these vaccines. And by not using them now, not waiting another couple of years, and we've already had years of debate on this, by not having them now, we're depriving other countries.
But is there not a principle at stake here about what the state's role is? And I, for one, you'd have probably heard me saying this, I'm pro people taking the vaccine. I've had my 3 jabs myself, but I am extremely worried about the way in which the state is saying, look, we will decide what you can and can't do based on whether you have had this medical procedure. And I really worry about that. I really worry about the state deciding on those freedoms being given to you or not. And Femi, you must understand that principle, surely.
Well, let's apply it to something else. If we said, for example, the government passed a law that said no school drivers are allowed to carry a pistol on their side. That principle of personal autonomy versus the risk that they cause to somebody else, even if this person is absolutely peaceful, there's still that 1%, 0.1% chance.
False equivalence. I'm sorry, it's a false equivalence. You are not asking me, by not carrying a pistol, to put something into my body. And that is different. That is different to carrying a pistol. This is something where you're saying to me, inject myself with something. Now, it's something that I happen to agree that people should be injected with, but it's body autonomy.
And that applies to doctors who have to take several vaccines in order to practice medicine in the NHS because of the principle of it. If you are in that job, there is a heightened risk. And yes, truck drivers tend to be quite solitary. But then they go to the other country. They'll have to stay in a hostel with other truck drivers, and it's just a massive cross pollination.
All right, Portia, what do you say to what the principle of the state deciding on these things based on what you put in your body and those freedoms?
Well, it's entirely unjust. There's a chance that it minimizes the health risk you pose to others. That is not a reason sufficient for the state to overreach and enforce or basically coerce you into having a vaccine.
2 things. One, we are talking about 160,000 deaths in the UK. That's what we're dealing with. So we're not talking about, it's just a minor inconvenience. It's too much of an inconvenience. People died in their thousands and are continuing to die. About 2 days ago, we had the highest death toll since last February with 436 deaths. Not to mention, if you are on this side, because the topic of this debate is, are they right to protest?
Yeah.
If you think they're right to protest, I'm curious, Portia, what's your view on the policing bill? Because this protest would be banned under this, because it would put people nearby at risk of feeling, quote unquote, serious unease, as, for example, the Prime Minister is definitely feeling uneasy. If you support this government, who are looking to ban precisely this sort of thing,
all right,
you can't support these protests.
We've got to move on after this, so let Portia answer.
Well, I think that particular bill that's domestic policy. This is talking about truck drivers in Canada and vaccine mandates more broadly. My views on that bill, well, I think people have the right to protest. I don't support everything the government introduces in every single bill. And I think that, if anything, this proves the importance of the right to protest on something so pertinent to your life as to what you can and not put into it.
All right.
And the ability to continue your job and your livelihood at your refusal at a vaccine, which to you might have very little added benefit.
All right, there we must leave it. Really, really good to hear from you both. Really spirited debate on that. I think you both made some brilliant points, actually. Portia Berry-Kilby from Young Voices, Femi Oluwole, political commentator. Thank you. No singing today, Femi. Sadly, we don't get to hear that from you. Portia, I don't know what your singing voice is like, but this could have been the most harmonious trio since the 3 Degrees. But thank you very much indeed, both of you.
Good talk.
Hot talk. Bold talk. Talk radio.
Listen on your smart speaker.
Watch it live on your smart TV.
The world headquarters of common sense.
Talk Radio.